Can you just talk a little bit about how you feel about doing this?
For me, there's a lot of layers of body image and how men see it and objectification of the body. And I think for many years in my life, through various sexual abuse things that had come up, I felt like disconnected from my body. I felt like my body was an object for men to use. Because I grew up in such an Orthodox community where we are meant to like cover our knees like 3 inches below and cover anything below our ankles, like, you know, cover your toes with the socks and, you know, the collarbone and the elbows and all that. To me, I was sort of indoctrinated with the belief that if I reveal any other part of my body, if I lift my sleeve like that and I reveal my elbow, that is a way of me sort of making a man sin. Like, I'm responsible for the man's sin, which is like a big burden on women. My parents are Lubavitch and all kinds of Hasidic people, and then there's also within that, within each sect of Hasidic movements, there's also like variations of how religious you are.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I'm one of 11. I used to wear tights only. I wasn't allowed to wear socks or like knee highs or anything like that, like just in case my sock would ever fall down and then you would see my legs. And girls in my class would wear knee highs, and that was totally acceptable by the school regulations. That was like not okay with my parents. I would buy socks, they would end up in the laundry and they were thrown out, and then they would get very upset and I would get punished for buying socks. I had the biggest fight with my mother when I wanted to wear a denim skirt that all the other girls in my class wore, and she was like, denim is not like, it's not a respectable material, we don't wear that. And I just felt very uncomfortable. And aside from that, I mean, we came here, my family moved here because of financial reasons, and it was sort of very rushed and overnight, and like we didn't really have a choice. And we lived with my grandparents, and we all lived like in 2 bedrooms, and I think at the time we were 8 children and my parents, and it was a lot of stress. And I was like, I don't want to be part of any of this. I don't want to take any extra space. I don't want to eat any extra food. And it was like this whole thing of like, my grandparents have their food and we have our food and we can't eat their food. If I could just disappear, it would be easier. Like, I don't want to be in the middle of anybody's stuff. I was working for this person at a camp, and he was one of the rabbis there, and I was his mother's helper. So I basically took care of however many children he had. There was like some sexual abuse that had started. At first he was sort of, you know, I guess he tried to figure out like where my limitations were, and I knew that like any touch between man and woman is not okay. You know, we don't even talk about sexuality at all or like anything like that. For me, this rabbi explained to me why I was like sort of chosen and why it was okay for him to touch me. So like it made some sort of vague sense to me. Like, you know, he was my employer, my boss, whatever. He was somebody, also a respectable person in the community. So what he said is supposed to be truth. I think it was probably 13, like 12 or 13, something like that. So in the beginning, it was just like touching and whatever, things that I had never been exposed to. Like, I never watched a movie. I had never seen anything on TV. So then, like, one night he woke me up in the middle of the night and he sort of forced me to give him oral sex, I guess. But I didn't know what it was. I thought he like peed in my mouth or something. And then it happened a couple times like that, like at different times of the day when I was sort of caught off guard while watching his kids sometimes. And I was like, but the kids are in the bath. And he's like, no, it's just 2 minutes. We just have to do this one thing. And eventually I told my mother, and she was so angry at me. To her, I was like, that's not even allowed. Like, why would I make up such a lie? I ended up going to a camp nurse. Like the next day, all I know is somebody picked me up and brought me to my aunt and uncle in Montreal. We never talked about it again. When I got to Montreal, I shaved my head. I just didn't want to look feminine. I started wearing like very big clothing, like as big as it could, the bigger the better. First I was like washing my hands like obsessively and showering obsessively. I was constantly showering. I was constantly trying to scrub myself. I was like always bleeding. And that's when I started having, I guess, what they eventually called an eating disorder. That it wasn't about food or body. It was just about like cleaning out my insides. So I was diagnosed with like bulimia and OCD. Yeah. I didn't even know where I belonged anymore. I came from this place where I was like the perfect child. I was a perfect straight A student. I was a perfect student. The principals loved me. I was teacher's pet. I did all kinds of like extracurriculars. I would dance. I would go to like, you know, old age homes and like perform pantomime, piano. My parents ended up moving upstate New York. My father got a job there as a rabbi. They sent me to like a much more right-wing school than I was in before or that I had ever been in. They wanted me to close like they had this like extra button on the top. They called this like the tinnitus button or something. And I just felt so claustrophobic, especially after that. I think it was just everything bothered me, and I couldn't I wasn't trying to be a bad kid. I just like didn't want to close it. So within a couple months I got kicked out, and then that was sort of it. And eventually a couple months later, my father sat me down and gave me the ultimatum of, we have 10 other children and they're all, you know, following in our footsteps, and you're the oldest daughter and you're sort of ruining it for us. So either, you know, be like us and do what we say and act you know, like you're supposed to in our household or leave. And I just felt like, whatever, we're on like food stamps and Section 8, like I'm sure I could figure it out by myself. So I left.
And there was no one for you to talk to, like no sibling, no nothing related.
There was this woman that I had gotten to know one summer that was really nice, and that's where I went to live. I lived by her in Queens, and she said I could live in her basement. And I kind of thought that probably most children my age, if you want to be cool, these were the things that I thought. You should drop out of school, lose your virginity, and do drugs. So those were my goals. So I like lost my virginity to some guy that I don't know. And I was like confused with what he was doing. You know, I was like, why is he going in and out? I thought it was just like one in, you know? I was like, what's going on here? After that incident, there were other sort of abuse related things like from random people that would happen, just recurring in my life, like throughout my life. I ended up in Baltimore, but I was only there for like a couple months. And the wife of where I lived, the woman happened to be a therapist. And she noticed that I was like scrubbing myself a lot and or she didn't really know, but she just knew that I was in the shower all the time. I used to like throw up in the shower. It was like this thing that nobody would know. It was like my private ritual. She noticed that behavior and she talked to the principal, and he knew that I was like sleeping in the closet all day and depressed. So they approached my parents and basically said she needs to be seen by a professional. And they ended up going to like a mental institution, which I had no exposure to. Like I never knew what that was. And then they said, okay, you have an eating disorder. You're going to go to our eating disorder unit. It was like the one time in the world that I cursed and I said like, fuck you to my parents when they closed the door and I was like being locked up in this unit. I remember my parents, like they would come once a week for the therapy session there. And like the talk of the session was, I want my jeans that are at home, and my parents weren't willing to bring it to me. And they would say like, don't you see? She's crazy. All she talks about is jeans. There was a nurse at the table that watched us eat everything, or if not, like we would be forced with like a tube up, or, you know, like to force feed us. But I stole a napkin because I wanted to go and throw up afterwards. Like I just felt too uncomfortable. And at the end of the lunch, dinner, whatever it was, they're like, where's your other napkin? I'm like, oh, I only got one today. And they're like, no, you got two. Anyways, there was like a code, all the like the buzzers go off, they lock the door, whatever it is, and extra security comes to the floor. Two people are like sitting on me, holding me down, like wanting to do a body search on me, like in front of everybody in the unit. And it was like so humiliating. At the end, they did find the napkin that I hid. They sedated me, they put me on a restraint and like in one of those rooms. And then it was like another like, okay, so now I'm crazy and I'm like in a, you know, locked to a bed because I stole a napkin. Like, I don't know, it was like very painful for me. So I really, really, really just wanted to die. I thought like it would just be so much easier. In hospitals, like in general, they check for all sharps. Like you can't have any sharps in you. But I happened to have like a pair of jeans that had like multiple safety pins in it, and I guess I didn't see them. So I found them, and they would come around with a flashlight like every 10 minutes to look, just to make sure that we were behaving and sleeping and whatever. So in between flashlight, you know, things, I would just be carving my my wrist out, waiting for it to bleed enough. I think there were 3 safety pins. So they found the one that I was using. I hid the other 2 inside of my vagina, and they were like, "Where's the safety pin?" And I refused to tell them. So they put me in this other quiet room. I was there for 3 days because like I finally, after the 3rd day, I was like willing to tell them where it was. And there was somebody that sat by my door 24/7 and I don't know, was monitoring me, making sure that I wasn't doing anything to myself, I guess. And I remember afterwards, the woman, I finally told her, I think she was the one that was sitting by my door, and I told her that where I hid them, because I realized that otherwise I'm just going to spend the rest of my time here. And she was like, she seemed like she actually cared. And I was like, wait, you care? She was like, you know, that's dangerous. Like you could have developed an infection, like rust can grow, you know, like that's really dangerous. And I was like, why would you even care? Like who are, like, you know, like you're a stranger. I was baffled by the fact that like she seemed to genuinely actually care, you know. Fast forward a bunch of years, there's a lot of just drama. Things just kept getting worse and worse. Like at a certain point, my bulimia got so bad that I couldn't throw up, that like my gag reflex didn't work anymore. So I couldn't reach down low enough because everything was so like swollen that I would use a toothbrush to throw up. And then one time I swallowed a toothbrush. I ended up running into somebody that I knew from a long, you know, I heard stories of her. She started telling me like different things that she was doing to turn her life around, and I just thought, you know, like, okay, so I have this all figured out, like I'm better off dead, but what if I just gave it a chance of like being, you know, 100%, you know, sober, abstinent, whatever, like really present, and then making that decision. Like, so I decided to give myself this like sort of 3-month challenge. At some point I was like purging a minimum of 10 times a day. And then it was like the first time I purged 8 instead of 10. I was like, wow, that's amazing. You know, like I made progress. Mm-hmm. And then it was like down to like once a day, which to me was huge. I was like, okay, I'm recovered. Like I'm done, you know? And then it became like once a month, once a week, once a month. And then it was like this slow progress. What really helped me was I went to trauma therapy. You're supposed to like move on to do this group therapy where you talk about your sexual abuse and with a group of people, and then sort of after that you graduate. And usually that's supposed to take a year. Like I was there for almost 3 years, which I knew wasn't like the same, schedule as everybody else, but they never like said a word to me. They never tried to push me. I had another therapist that just taught me like self-care stuff, how to meditate, how to start to learn to love myself. What does that even mean? Why would I love myself? So I tried to change that mantra from how to shut off everything and use food as a numbing agent and sort of like a way of self-hatred to a place of self-love. Like what is food meant to be? It's meant to nourish us. I started treating myself like as if I was my own daughter. So like how would I treat my daughter? Well, I would give her like this beautiful abundant plate of like berries, and I'd want to love her. I'd want to hold her to pieces and hug her. And actually a lot of times I do. I'm like, I love myself. Of course I'm a worthy human being. Just by my existence, that's it. I don't have to do anything to deserve. I exist, and therefore I'm good enough. Since then, like I started school, this was like a real gift to myself to go to school. It kind of didn't really make sense. I didn't have a high school education, so I didn't have a diploma or, anything like that. I remember somebody told me that Hunter College was like the best of the CUNYs and they're cheap. So I was like, perfect. I actually took I think one of the SATs, and I scored well considering the fact that I studied like in one summer. And I went back, I was like, here's my scores, like, can I come now? And they're like, no, like where did you go to school? I'm like, I still didn't go to high school, but I took all these tests, I should be able to come. After 3 rejections, they ended up letting me in. They were like, we've never made this exception for any student, but I was like really persistent. I took my first science class. I was just like, oh my God, like I think I know what's going on. I know nothing, like this is just one class. Like, can you imagine if I took more? I just wanted to know more about how to care for the body. It was like either how to completely destroy my body or how to heal it. So I graduated from Hunter with a degree in biology, and I graduated as valedictorian. And I remember when I went up and gave the speech, the commencement address, and I was just like, this is baffling. Like I'm supposed to be the total fuck up. So I'm going to medical school. It was like one of those decisions. I was dating a guy at the time, and he was like, are you crazy? You're turning 30. I never dreamt that I would go to medical school.
Last question. So why in your body, in your journey, in your skin, in you, is it a good place to be?
Like all of the, little scars, like I have stretch marks from when I gained weight from like, stopping the eating disorder, and I have all these like cuts from when I used to cut myself, and all these different like things that I just remember, like the different parts of my life and the different fabrics of my being that have come together to be who I am today. This body has really supported me. It's a miracle that it's still here. It's a miracle that it like exists, it survives, my heart pumps, the blood's going through, like it's really taking care of me. And now I'm learning how to take care of it.
That's great, amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh.
That was
Thank you.
absolutely amazing, beyond belief. I'm so incredibly inspired. I'm putting the
Aw.
but you're amazing. Like, whew, do you notice, like, I'm gonna take photos of you now, as you are now.